Okay, before we get started, just a few housekeeping. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, organization, affiliation, and city. Please make sure you are on mute while speakers are presenting. We will have a few polls in the first set of slides, so just keep an eye out. Feel free to type your questions in the chat box throughout the presentation and we will get to them at the end. And also this webinar will be recorded and posted on the Postpartum Resource Center website.
I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, hosted by the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy in the Postpartum Resource Center of New York. I'm Sonia Murdoch, Executive Director of the Postpartum Resource Center of New York. We'll begin in just a few moments, and in the meantime, in order to get to know our audience a little better, you will see 3 poll questions appear in just a moment. And please note that these are optional. And if you do decide to participate in any poll questions today, your answers are anonymous. The results of the polls will be shared during the webinar today.
And here are the poll questions, and I'll leave them up for about a minute. Okay, and I'm going to end the polling and I'll share the results as well. So here we go.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So again, I'm Sonia Murdoch with the Postpartum Resource Center of New York, and we are excited to be offering this presentation in the Moving on Depression webinar series in collaboration with the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy. And I'll be sharing this morning about the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy. With the Moving on Maternal Depression is part of a national learning collaborative to advance policies that improve prevention, screening, and treatment with an emphasis on racial equity and culturally relevant practices in policy and systems management. One of the projects for the MOMD initiative is this webinar series, so we hope you enjoy. I'd like to introduce the Schuyler Center's intern, Jabrea Robinson, and Jabrea will be available in the chat for any technical questions that any of you may have. So again, thank you to the Schuyler Center and also much appreciation to Jabrea for her assistance today. With the Postpartum Resource Center of New York, the Postpartum Resource Center of New York helps New York State moms, dads, and families get the help they need for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. and we've been doing that since 1998. Our statewide toll-free helpline is available 7 days a week with additional support for moms on call and family telephone support. Online is free access to our statewide PMAD resource directory. We also offer education on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders through our training institute, including our Circle of Caring support group program and various initiatives such as Project 62, the Lisa Mary Riley Visioning Education Series, and Take Care of You. If any of you have any questions regarding more specific services we offer, please let me know at the end of the presentation today. We also do want to share that this webinar is approved for one continuing education unit for New York State licensed social workers and New York State licensed mental health counselors at a cost of $15. Helping Hands Psychotherapy is recognized by the New York State Education Department State Board for Social Work as an approved provider for continuing education for licensed social workers, and by the State Board for Mental Health Practitioners as an approved provider of continuing education for licensed mental health counselors. So at this time, Jabrea, that she will post a link in the chat for anyone who's interested in taking part in the CE unit and learning more from Helping Hands Psychotherapy. So before we introduce our speakers, we'd like to ask 2 more poll questions. And remember that these are optional and anonymous questions. The answers to these questions will be displayed for the audience to see. So thank you for answering them if you choose to.
Thank you for submitting your answers, and I will share the results of the poll.
Okay, thank you for everybody's participation. Thank you. So I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for today. And also this is our backing up, this is our contact information. So thank you. So thanks, Jabrea. So our speakers for today, we're very excited about this opportunity for them to share about parental and infant mental health and the work they're doing in their community in Rockland County, New York. In the order that they are presenting, we welcome Francine, Barabell, Dr. Shelley, Fleit, and Elaine Carlevaro being with us here today. So first off, I will introduce Francine Barabell. She is a practicing speech and language pathologist with over 35 years of experience. She earned her Master's of Communication degree from Queens College and did her clinical practicum at Long Island Jewish Hospital. She has worked in every conceivable setting, and for the past 20 years has been providing speech and language services to the Rockland Health Department's early intervention and preschool program. Her area of expertise is in the 0 to 5 population with a focus on social emotional development, social communication, and early screening for autism. For the past 5 years, she has participated in the Behavioral Health Subcommittee of the Better Baby Care campaign and is presently their initiative on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Her interest in promoting early identification of autism in babies and toddlers has led her naturally to study the crucial relationship between social emotional development and social communication from birth. This has evolved to exploring the integral relationship of mental health wellness of mother, parent, and baby. The second speaker that we will have today is Shelley Fleit. Dr. Fleit received her MSW and PhD from Stony Brook University School of Social Welfare in 1988 and 2008, respectively. Dr. Fleet's professional social work experience includes over 30 years in a range of health-related settings, including hospital, skilled nursing, and rehabilitation centers, and community-based agencies, working with the individuals facing diverse physical and emotional challenges. For the past 12 years, professional work has focused exclusively on education and policy change related to infant and maternal health and mental health concerns. For the past 6 years, Dr. Fleit has additionally provided psychotherapy for Passages Wellness and counseling for women, a community-based mental health practice specializing in women's reproductive mental health, and works as a consultant and volunteer with the Postpartum Resource Center of New York. And our third presenter today is Elaine Carlevaro. Elaine is a registered dietitian nutritionist with many years of experience in prenatal nutrition. She has been a certified lactation counselor since 2010. As a coalition member of the Better Baby Care campaign and the Breastfeeding Coalition of Rockland County, she's a champion of better breastfeeding support in her community. In 2015, she advocated for the hiring of an IBCLC and helped to establish the Breastfeeding Nook at the Montefiore Nyack Prenatal Center, where she held the nutritionist position for 13 years. Additionally, she has conducted presentations on improving nutrition in high-risk populations for the Hudson Valley Perinatal Network. Elaine's current focus is bringing awareness to perinatal mood and anxiety disorders through her involvement with the Nyack Basics Coalition and the Better Baby Care Campaign's Behavioral Health Subcommittee. She's in the process of starting a private practice working with women through their childbearing years as a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and functional medicine certified health coach. She's looking forward to participating in an upcoming Circle of Caring support group, advanced facilitator training with the Postpartum Resource Center of New York's Training Institute as she works to become perinatal mental health certified. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our speakers here today, and we will begin with Fran. So Fran, whenever you're ready, welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right, I just unmuted. Okay. Well, good morning, and thank you so much, Sonia, for the beautiful introduction, and thank you, Sonia, for your work at the Postpartum Resource Center and all the great work that you do to serve the families through the center. I am so happy to contribute to this important webinar series, and I'm also excited to learn more about this timely topic from Elaine and Shelley. And I made a little note that we are going to interchangeably be using the word mother, parent, mom, caregiver throughout the webinar. So just take a little note of that. All right. So how do we support parents in the most important role of their lives? Next. Next. Go back one. Thank you. Okay, so here first some fun facts for you to think about. 7 things to know about the infant brain and nervous system. The infant brain is anything but simple. A 4-week-old fetus forms new neurons at a rate of 250,000 every minute. Babies are born with 100 to 200 billion neurons. A baby's brain reaches 3/4 of its adult weight and size by age 2. By 3 years, a baby's brain will reach 80% of adult volume and process close to 1,000 trillion connections between neurons. A complex network of neurons, nerve cells, will grow naturally during the first few years. Everything a baby experiences establishes synapse, neuron connections, which lay the foundation for intellectual and emotional development. Brain development is able to take place because of the plasticity or the brain's ability to change and recognize neural pathways based on new experiences. Next. 5 things to know about infant mental health and stress. So we realize that if a parent is experiencing maternal depression or any other type of trauma, we need to be concerned on the potential negative impact for the baby in all areas of development. That would include emotional, cognitive, physical, and language. Frequent exposure to chronic stress can negatively affect the developing brain. When babies experience stress, their bodies respond by releasing stress hormones. In large amounts, stress hormones can impact nerve cell growth. Babies who are exposed to chronic stresses can experience disruption in brain development. Disruption in brain development can impact learning, behavior, and health. The effect of chronic stress in infancy and early childhood can last a lifetime. Next. So, being concerned about a parent's mental wellness is crucial to assuring the baby's mental health. So, here's what baby's mental health actually means. 4 things to know about infant health. Infant mental health is the developing capacity of the child from birth to 3 to experience, regulate, and express emotions, to form close and secure interpersonal relationships, explore the environment, and learn, all in the context of family, community, and cultural expectations for young children. That's the definition from 0 to 3. Okay. So let's start at the very beginning of how that emotional connection is created. It first starts with the parent bonding, that's the middle heart, falling in love with baby from the moment they find out they are pregnant or at first sight. Sometimes this should happen seamlessly. Sometimes there are a couple of bumps, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. And Shelley will expand more on that. So holding, caressing, feeding the newborn helps give the parent a sense of well-being. And as this bonding starts, then the baby starts to form attachments to the person who they're bonding with. This is the emotional connection that develops between mother and baby. Noticing and responding to the baby's need for warmth, cuddling, play, rest, and food all help to build the baby's secure attachment, forming the basis for trust. And as we get both those processes going, bonding and attachment, they meld into what's called attunement. Attunement is the loving connection with the baby, a sense of feeling felt as the baby and parent both taking cues through the eyes, ears, touch, and facial expression. This dance of reciprocity creates an unbroken feeling of connectedness. Okay, next. Okay, so let's look a little bit more closely at the concept of attunement and the early beginnings of attunement. So 5 behaviors that let us know that attunement is actually happening. Parents attune to babies when they observe, interpret, and act on what their babies need. This is done mutually through eye contact. Looking at your baby affectionately conveys positive emotions and signals feelings of safety, relaxation, and joy. Facial expressions. Your face is able to express countless emotions without you saying a word. If your expression is calm and attentive, your baby will feel secure. Tone of voice. Your baby is never too young to understand your tone that conveys tenderness, interest, concern, and understanding. Touch. The way you touch your baby conveys your emotional state. Your gentle touch, warm hugs, and reassuring pats on their back convey so much emotion to your child. And then pacing, timing, and intensity. The pacing and timing and intensity of your speech movements and facial expressions can reflect your state of mind. This is important to help calm, soothe, or reassure your baby. Next. So, as a speech therapist, and this is the lens that I view everything through, the observations I make about babies pre-linguistically, that's before they even say their first words, are actually the same behaviors that are observed in evaluating attunement. In other words, social emotional behavior and social communication skills in babies are one and the same. So, for example, I would be trying to observe in a baby under a year if they're doing imitations and gestures. And I would also be watching to see how the parent is initiating so those behaviors can be developed. So important questions to explore when evaluating attunement. So things that I would look for. Does the baby appear alert? Does the baby respond to people? Does the baby cry, coo, and smile? Does the baby show interest in the human face? Does the baby vocalize frequently? Does the baby exhibit expected motor development? Does the baby signal discomfort, appear to be easily comforted? Does the baby exhibit normal or excessive displeasure? Does the baby appear outgoing, or does it seem passive or withdrawn? And does the baby have good muscle tone? And on the other side, with the caregiver, I would be looking for, does the caregiver respond to the infant's vocalization or change voice tone when talking to or about the baby? Does the caregiver engage to face-to-face contact with the infant or exhibit interest in and encourage age-appropriate development? Does the caregiver respond to the baby's cues, demonstrate the ability to comfort the baby, enjoy close physical contact with the baby? Does the caregiver initiate close physical contact with the baby and initiate positive interactions with the infant? Does the caregiver talk about their baby in positive terms and enjoy speaking about their baby? Next. So if attunement is happening, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be happening, what are the outcomes from creating a secure relationship with your baby? Well, loving, nurturing relationships enhance emotional development and mental health. When infants and toddlers are treated with kindness and encouragement, they develop a sense of safety and emotional security, which creates a secure emotional base. This space allows the baby to explore the world frequently, checking back for reassurance. The more baby explores and tries new things, the more success they experience. Kind, nurturing relationships will teach the baby how to treat others. Babies who feel cherished grow up to be children and adults who care about others. Social emotional connections promote social communication skills, which form the underpinnings for first words and language. Next. So let's look at some of the milestones. So while addressing the mental health situations of new parents, um, we are simultaneously trying to promote, preserve, and protect their social emotional relationships with babies. So let's take a look at some of the milestones that we might see during the first year of life. So from birth to 3, the baby looks at faces, listens to voices, usually quiets when picked up, cries, smiles, and coos. The parent looks lovingly at the baby, listens to the baby, talks and sings to the baby, picks up and soothes the crying baby, offers a warm smile, and touches and cuddles the baby gently. Okay. Next. So as parents see positive, joyful reactions from their babies, that from stimulating the babies, this improves attunement. The more attuned, the greater the joy from all those little everyday moments. So from 3 to 6 months, the baby gives warm smiles and laughs, cries when upset, seeks comfort, can be comforted the majority of time, shows excitement by waving arms and legs, enjoys looking and being near that special person. A parent holds the baby when feeding, shares baby smiles and laughter, notices and pays attention to the baby, responds to the baby's cries and coos, holds and reads to the baby, plays lovingly with the baby. Next. So very important, an important takeaway is using everyday routines to help the parents pay attention to the intention of having fun with the baby is very important. So from the 6 to 9 months, the baby plays games such as patty cake, responds to his own name, enjoys daily routines, may get upset when separated from a familiar person, unsure of strangers, may control self by sucking thumb or holding special toy and blanket. The parent takes pleasure in games with the baby, talks to the baby in a gentle voice, is predictable and consistent, watches and knows what the baby wants and needs, reads with the baby, sings songs, and says nursery rhymes. Next. Wow. So within that first year, so many different things happen. So from 9 to 12 months, the baby is able to be happy, mad, and sad, show feelings, and by smiling, crying, and pointing, has a special relationship with parents and caregivers, is curious about playthings, imitates others, enjoys books, trusts that the needs will be met. The parent names feelings such as happy and mad, sad, is available, responsive, gentle, and protective of the baby, encourages the baby to explore, reads books, with the baby, talks, sings, and says rhymes to the baby. So yeah, wow, that first year went really fast. How many trillion neural connections did we just help the baby make? How many did the baby help us retain by just interacting with the baby? Next. So, in, so investing all this attention to the baby and creating attunement, where does that get us after a year? Well, what we're doing is we are preparing our child for everything that is to come, including a school-ready child and what they look like. And if we have been successful, we have set the foundations for the building blocks, leading to a healthy, mostly well-adjusted, socially competent little human being. Next. So a final thought to leave you with. Our effectiveness as parents is in direct proportion to the strength of the bond we have with our children. Thank you so much for listening. And now our presentation will continue. I turn you over to the expertise of Dr. Shelley Fleit.
Thank you, Fran. And thank you all for participating in this webinar, and of course for Sonia and the Schuyler Center. Fran laid a really wonderful foundation for what I'm going to present, because I'm going to build on the perfect case scenario that Fran outlined. Healthy babies need happy and healthy moms, parents, and families. What we want to look at is winding the clock back to even before a woman gets pregnant. Because remember that mom comes into pregnancy with a whole lot of experiences and a whole lot of health needs and mental health needs. And that developing fetus is then literally bathed in all of mom's experiences, preconception and during pregnancy. And then once the baby's born, we get to understand the impact of mom's mental health and physical well-being. Next slide, please. So I won't go over this whole slide because Fran really talked about how significant the relationships are once an infant is born. So we'll be talking more about that. But babies need those trusting and caring primary caregivers in order to have the social development and cognitive development and neurodevelopment that they need to then have a healthy and happy life. Next slide. I think about Fran's slide with the 3 hearts and what babies need in order to create those healthy connections and neurodevelopment. But what if having a baby is not the happiest time of a woman's life? Can you imagine feeling disinterested or disconnected from your newborn, being too frightened to care for your infant, unable to stop crying, to get out of bed, feeling angry, resentful, confused? Because women envision that perfect scenario, or even having scary thoughts. Next. Imagine also feeling too ashamed to tell anyone, or being too immobilized or too agitated that they don't even know they can ask for help or should ask for help or how to ask for help. So I work in a psychotherapy practice, and we do see, our practice niche is working with women experiencing perinatal mood anxiety disorders, and the literature also describes some of these experiences, so we hear firsthand. So some of the things women say are living with postpartum depression was like being trapped alone in a dark closet with walls lined by broken light switches, always taunting and unable to fix. Or postpartum depression and anxiety made me feel terrified of my baby and my own mind, feeling alone and incapable to be a good mother. Or feeling afraid to share their truth, that I hated every moment, every second of those cries. I hated being in a constant state of hypervigilance, being so anxious that moms don't even have time to sleep or eat. They're so worried. Or feeling unworthy, because remember, we're socialized with the beautiful romanticized view of parenting. And whoever in this audience has had babies kind of can relate to, not so much. Next slide, please. So we're talking about in this brief time period, a little taste of why we need to understand PMADs, perinatal mood anxiety disorders, and how its impact is critical for all of us. We acknowledge that there continues to be a stigma associated with having a mental illness of any kind. And as mentioned, women are often too embarrassed or too frightened to ask for help because Other women are not talking about their challenges enough. We're not making it seem like it's okay to experience these things. Other women make their feelings, they're not sharing their honest truths. So what are some of the predictors for perinatal mood anxiety disorders and also risk factors? So if you come across women understanding that a personal or family history of PMADs or other mood anxiety disorders increases risk, significant mood reactions or hormonal changes, women who experience severe PMS or have experienced pregnancy loss or use birth controls or going through puberty. Endocrine function dysfunction can increase the risk for PMADs. Looking at social factors, stresses, unwanted pregnancies, lack of social supports, marital relationship distress, financial stress, even recent loss of job or move creates stress that impacts the woman who is pregnant and then the quality of the interactions with the newborns. Complications of pregnancy or childbirth, infertility, having a traumatic birth, or history of sexual abuse. Perfectionism. We know women who feel they can do everything and they're going to be great at it, superwoman. And unmet expectations, feeling inadequate, and of course, being sleep deprived, big risk factor. Next slide. If you remember nothing else, remember that perinatal mood anxiety disorders, or PMADs, are the most common complication of pregnancy that we're not talking enough about, or if at all. I've had women come into the practice after suffering in silence for 6 months because, yeah, perinatal mood anxiety, which is, postpartum depression was mentioned, but she didn't feel like she was going to hurt herself or her baby. So she didn't think that's what she was experiencing. Also, it's important to know that the whole perinatal period in which these mood anxiety disorders can occur starts with pregnancy and ends at the first year of life. So it can occur and it can build or it can recur during that time period. So what are we looking at? We're not talking about the baby blues, which 60 to 80% of women experience. These symptoms are temporary. They come and go. They begin 1 to 3 days after delivery, and they usually resolve in days or up to 2 weeks. But with PMAD, symptoms intensify and persist. So it's been recorded that 10 to 20% of pregnant and parenting women experience moderate to severe symptoms of depression and/or anxiety. And we know this number is underreported, right? Because people aren't admitting that they're having a hard time being mom. That's just not accepted. PMADs can also include panic disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, triggered post-traumatic stress disorder, which is recently estimated between 1.5 and 5 or 6% secondary to traumatic birth experiences. And again, a history of sexual abuse, bipolar disorders, and postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis is very rare, but it represents a serious emergency. And women who come into pregnancy with a history of bipolar disorder are at particular risk. Next slide. So just touching on, we all know how everyone experienced heightened mood, just heightened anxiety especially, and other mental health symptoms during the pandemic. So this was a brief study of 1,100 pregnant postpartum women between just May and August of 2020. And the pre-pandemic rates of depression went from 15 to 20% to 36%, and anxiety during pregnancy or after pre-pandemic rates, 29% and up to 72%. And again, having worked with women throughout the pandemic, every aspect of the pregnancy, the delivery, and postpartum period was impacted by the pandemic. Next slide. We have to remember that non-gestational parents also experience PMADs, impacting infant social, emotional, and physical wellness as they're interacting with their infant. Fathers, adoptive parents, gay and lesbian parents, and parents through surrogacy, experience similar dissonance between expectations of parenthood and the reality. They're undergoing transitions, fatigue, and adjustments of a new child at home. There's changing dynamics and roles and responsibilities within the household. Non-biological lesbian mothers can struggle for their role in the family when it's their partners giving birth to the baby. There's often legal issues depending on where they live, on their rights. And social recognition may be elusive because they didn't have the pregnancy as a visual cue that they too are becoming mothers. Adoptive parents as well as becoming parents through surrogacy are not celebrated in the same way as when one is pregnant, yet experience the same uncertainties, transitions, and fatigue. One thing I didn't mention, which is important to keep in mind, that once a woman gets pregnant, the focus is on the baby, right? And through the pregnancy is on the mom and the baby. And all other members of the family are not paid attention to. And once the baby is born, the focus shifts to the baby, right? So this is an effort to attend to the needs of the moms and other caregivers that are responsible, because we're not really paying attention that much to them. Next slide. Okay, the impact of untreated depression and anxiety during pregnancy and postpartum periods. Remember, the fetal development requires emotionally and physically healthy moms, what they're bringing into the pregnancy, because that fetus is developing literally bathed in what that mom is bringing to that fetus. Healthy cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and physical development of infants and children require healthy caregivers, emotionally and physically well. Next slide. When you don't treat PMADs during pregnancy, you find that women often engage in unhealthy behaviors that put the developing fetus at risk and the infant well-being. Women with anxiety and depression often don't pay attention to their sleep and nutrition patterns. They don't gain weight. They don't attend regular, consistent prenatal care. And you'll find that they start behaving in risky behaviors and use of harmful substances, which might be your clue that mom is going through something that needs to be looked at. Next slide. Fetal, physical, and neurodevelopment may be compromised when with untreated perinatal depression, anxiety during pregnancy. There's shorter gestations have been reported, low birth weight, stress response challenges, and impaired information processing, and emotional dysregulation. Think of all those neurons that are developing during gestation and once a baby's born, how critical those connections are. Next slide. Once a baby is born, again, if mom and other caregivers are experiencing depression or anxiety, their parenting and caregiving is impacted. They're not paying attention to routines and structures. They're not paying attention to safety. They're less likely to use car seats properly, to cover electrical outlets. They're basically surviving right now, feeling that way. They may not attend to water temperature, compromised feeding practices, lack of attention to sleep safety practices, increasing the risks for SIDS. And they're not bringing their infant regularly to the pediatrician, putting that infant's health again at risk. Next slide. And Fran talked a lot about this, developmental risks to infants when postpartum depression, anxiety is untreated. We have to see that a mom and other caregivers who are depressed or anxious are not interacting in the healthiest way with their infant. It's impaired bonding, nurturing, and attachment because they're not interacting, they're not recognizing infant cues, they're not engaging in the way that these relationships need to go. If anyone's ever seen the still face experiment, I recommend looking at it because that shows an infant and a mom interacting and the incredible amount of distress that occurs with that infant when mom sort of checks out and becomes emotionally unavailable. It's kind of hard to watch, but it's a really good example of the need for those interactions. Increased behavior problems in infants and young children have been reported: cognitive delays, social, physical, and emotional dysregulation challenges, infant sleep problems, toddler temper tantrums, lack of empathy. School-age kids exhibit anxiety and inattention, hyperactivity, aggression, poor school performance. Remember, building on those healthy neurodevelopment and social emotional interactions. Next slide. Next slide. Whoa. There's a new construct that people are looking at called adverse babyhood experiences. Most of us have heard of adverse childhood experiences, which is ACEs. What this construct does is it sort of combines everything we've been talking about so far, beginning from preconception, impact of negative adverse experiences, preconception, all through the child's third birthday. So it identifies the range of influences that impact maternal, fetal, and infant development, distinct from the risk factors already identified in ACEs. Adverse babyhood experiences influence infant and maternal morbidity and mortality, increased risks for chronic illness and conditions in child and symptoms and other caregivers. The effects of adverse babyhood experiences add up, they accumulate. So we need to pay attention to them. Understanding and recognizes adverse babyhood experiences, it's hard to say ABES, like ACEs, provides opportunities to prevent, repair, and reverse the effects of adverse baby experiences for ACEs and poor health in parents and children. So being aware of the factors proactively can impact how these adverse baby, and we can interrupt adverse babyhood experiences. Next slide. So it takes a village and we all have a role. We need to increase awareness and education about signs and symptoms of perinatal mood anxiety disorders. And the way to do that is to normalize it. Every person has the potential for developing these disorders. They're biological, hormonally driven shifts in a person's wellness, emotional wellness. We need to also prepare parents for parenthood. It's not the perfect scenario. We need to allow individuals to prepare and plan around engaging support, supporting their relationship, and identifying risk factors. We need early detection and screening, treatment, and most importantly and powerfully, we need to just ask caregivers and parents, how are you doing? A pediatrician asked me that 40.5 years ago when I had my daughter. It took me by surprise and ended up being the most powerful feeling I have still retained to this day. It was my daughter's baby visit, and she cared, am I sleeping, am I eating? Ask the question. Next slide. Thank you. And now, that was a lot. I have a short period of time. I happily turn the last leg of our talk to Elaine Carlevaro, who will talk more about the village.
Thank you, Fran and Shelley, for your steadfast championship. We have about 10 minutes left, and I have quite a few slides. So I'm going to go through this quickly and move swiftly so we can have a Q&A after. We started this project over 4 years ago when we formed a subcommittee within the Better Baby Care campaign. We called it the Behavioral Health Subcommittee to start with. Next slide. The Behavioral Health Subcommittee was formed with a mixed group of professionals, but we were all committed in some way to the goal of promoting the social emotional health of babies. Marcia was a steadfast leader from the beginning with years of experience as an early childhood educator. Fran was determined to make a difference in the lives of the very young children she often encountered in her work. And the committee was her opportunity to make a difference. She volunteered her kitchen and her hospitality. Shelley traveled a long distance to be part of this committee. We knew her as the advocate for safe sleep practices, but it turned out that she was tenacious, that we needed to place our focus on supporting the mom first if we wanted to help the child. And this came out of her work counseling women postpartum. Myself, having raised a child with a behavioral health disorder, and also from working with women in pregnancy who had very high risk pregnancies, this topic drew me in. The same could be said for Suzanne and Sandra. Coming over the bridge from Westchester, they were also drawn into the topic for both personal and professional reasons. So we debated how we can help and what we can do. We had different viewpoints, which led to a passionate debate for quite a few months before we could start out on an agreement. Next slide. Long before we envisioned this webinar, we first had to understand that there is an unmet need to protect families with very young children. At first, we did not know anything about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. At least it was not on our radar. Even though the Better Baby Care campaign existed for many years prior, we had not connected the dots. Fran is right that 0 to 3 is a critical time in light of rapid brain growth. And it is a fragile time when the harmony between the parent and the baby, or the lack of harmony, has far-reaching effects. But Shelley's also right. Perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is the #1 complication of pregnancy. It is, yet it consistently goes untreated, undetected, and undertreated. It would be prudent to assume that all moms are at risk and families need a safety net in their community in order to have an impact on the social and emotional health of children. When this need is unmet, the consequences are devastating for everyone. Next slide. Ultimately, we decided to work on building a safety net around parents as the best way to promote the social and emotional health of infants and toddlers. Coincidentally, there was solid research that supported our conclusion. It came from the Achievement Gap Initiative started at Harvard University around the same time. Dr. Ron Ferguson identified a measurable gap in achievement by 2 years of age as nearly 80% of the brain developed. This led to the formation of the Boston Basics, a program aimed at communicating to everyone the imperative need for 5 basic principles to occur in the first 3 years of life for a child to thrive. The first principle is to manage stress and maximize love. On a side note, unknown to us at the time, this initiative had come to the attention of key people within one of our local school districts. And I will circle back to this later. Next slide. So a little bit about the tools you'll need to build a safety net in your community. By the end of my talk, you will know what resources to look for, and I will share with you what we did and are doing, some lessons we learned along the way that may be good to know up front. I placed them throughout the presentation, so you'll see them in light green. Next slide. We had an advantage in that the Better Baby Care campaign had cross-sector collaboration already in place. It is a coalition of family-centered organizations, agencies, and individuals who came together to promote, support, and enhance the quality of life, care for pregnant women, infants, toddlers, and their families. Child Care Resources of Rockland supported and hosted our meetings and continue to do that. You may not have a Better Baby Care campaign, but more likely you have similar agencies that are a wealth of resources when you collaborate with each other. And when you look at these resources, most are not unique to Rockland County. They exist where you live. The Postpartum Resource Center of New York has been and still is a huge part. While not officially part of the Better Baby Care campaign, Sonia Murdoch, the executive director, came with Shelley faithfully from Long Island. You will see her name mentioned throughout this presentation, and we cannot thank her and Shelley enough for being there with us. Next slide. Fostering awareness. Early on in 2017, we were just becoming aware ourselves that women were suffering in silence. By June of 2017, we were ready to begin building. We started with an invitation for Sonia of the Resource Center of New York to speak at a meeting of the Better Baby Care campaign. She spoke about building a safety net in our community and Project 62, which seeks to build a network of support services throughout the 62 counties in New York State for parents coping with postpartum depression. When I first heard about Project 62, I remember feeling shocked that there were no resources in Rockland that were specialized to perinatal mental health. I was clearly not the only person in the room who felt that way, because present at that meeting was Maria Mosquera, Rockland County community health physician. She subsequently joined our subcommittee and invited Sonia to address the Public Health Priority Committee in January of 2018, which she hosted with the goals looking to identify local resources, gaps in care, and vested partners. Next slide. In March of 2018, the then executive director of the Child Care Resources of Rockland placed us on the agenda of the Children's Legislative Forum, giving us an opportunity to give elected officials information that would help them to advocate for services. Next slide. After that event, there was another meeting at the Department of Health to follow up and propose a draft of the mental health services that had been identified. It turned out that the Department of Mental Health already had a list. It felt like we had spent a lot of energy reinventing the wheel, but we learned an important lesson. While it is immensely helpful to know what local resources are available and a great beginning point, we needed to know how perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are currently being treated versus how they should be treated. It's not the same as examining how they should be addressed. The difference is subtle, but so significant to building a safety net that doesn't let people fall through the holes. It's not enough to simply know who's out there offering treatment. Rarely is there a human connection ready and accessible when the need arises. And typically those services are not sensitive to the immediate needs of both the parents and the baby going through this crisis when appropriate help is critically needed. Next slide. One of the biggest priorities in 2018 was to organize a Community Awareness Day in May, along with the Lower Hudson Valley Perinatal Network and the Department of Health, who had access to the county executive. The Perinatal Network knew how to organize this kind of event, and they provided the blueprint from having done many of them in the past. They walked us through it and provided us access to their resources, such as large printing requests and web support. We could not have done it without them. Next slide. In the fall of 2018, Dr. Mosquera hosted a showing of The Dark Side of the Full Moon to the Department of Health staff, followed by a presentation by Sonia Murdoch. For all of this was the first time, for all of us, this was the first time seeing this film. The movie event quickly became one of the most useful tools we had to propel our message forward. A few months later, Dr. Mosquera left the position she held at the Department of Health, which changed the trajectory of our outreach in 2019. Her active participation in building a safety net was of great value because it gave us legitimate representation in the community. The Better Baby Care campaign performed a great service in the community, but to bring our initiative to the public, it needed the credibility of a major institution. Just days before she left, however, she drew our attention to the changes mentioned in the New York State Prevention Agenda of 2019 to 2024. Next slide. The latest version of the New York State Prevention Agenda added a goal in 2019 to promote well-being. You know, in the medical world, a typical response to our petition for greater support came from the perspective of disease prevention. Greater use of screening tools, provider training, access to behavioral health specialists. Well, there's no argument of the importance of these tools. An equally valuable perspective that gives balance to the first has to do with promoting well-being. It's another way to look at the health and wealth and how it's achieved. This book, put out by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in 2020, discusses the science of well-being. What is needed is a more comprehensive notion of health, one that focuses not only on disease prevention, but on creating the best opportunity to thrive in all aspects of life. This quote speaks directly to the appearance of well-being in the latest prevention agenda. There's not only scientific evidence for it, but now a call to action. And this point I'll also circle back to later. Next slide. So after fostering awareness, the next step is to build a support network. It was so encouraging when one of our lactation consultants became perinatal mental health certified. Her decision came out of our efforts from the Community Awareness Day in May. The subcommittee actively built partnerships with many vested agencies, hospitals, and coalitions in 2018 and 2019. Partnership with the Rockland County Department of Health Breastfeeding Coalition broadened our outreach to include lactation specialists, doulas, childbirth educators, and other specialties. Thankfully, we were invited to speak at their meetings several times. And in July of 2019, the Breastfeeding Coalition sponsored a showing of The Dark Side of the Full Moon. It is vitally important to have a support network so others can take on the work with you. When you're able to delegate the work, you build better, and it's more sustainable. In July, they hosted this movie event for medical staff at Montefiore-Nyack Hospital. This is a great example of what you can do when you partner with other coalitions. They used the movie event template from the Resource Center and just made it their own. Next slide. And on the same day, NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, repeated the event. This is their invite that they sent out to mental health providers. They used the same template, but did something different. The Resource Center helped them to bring the author of The Bridesmaid Daughter, Nina Giles, as a guest speaker. She shared her memories of what her childhood was like when her mother suffered from untreated postpartum psychosis after giving birth to her. She spoke about the childhood adversities she suffered and the long-term effects for both her and her mom. Both events were followed by a Q&A with Sonia Murdoch, and many mental health providers attended, building our support network. Next slide. So strengthening disease prevention is always going to be an important part of the safety net. In October of 2019, we planned for medical grand rounds at a different local hospital for March in 2020, but we rescheduled it, obviously, because of the pandemic, and we had it in March of 2021. So a medical grand rounds presentation was provided virtually to the OBGYN department of the Pediatrics Department of Good Samaritan Hospital in Suffern and St. Anthony Community Hospital of Warwick, New York. It was presented by the Director of Women's Behavioral Health at Zucker Hills Hospital in New York, and Sonia as well. Pediatricians, obstetricians, as well as many support services were in attendance. Next slide. Circling back to the point that I made earlier, it is equally important to create well-being. This is where coincidence served us greatly. Remember the Achievement Gap initiative that led to the creation of the Boston Basics? The Basics had become a national campaign that was spreading to many places in our area. The Nyack Basics Coalition was launched by Nyack Public Schools in January of 2018. The first principle, manage stress and maximize love, became the bridge that united our efforts with theirs. The Basics coordinator joined our subcommittee after attending one of our movie events. On January 3rd of 2020, we arranged to meet with Dr. Winsome Gregory, the Assistant Superintendent of Instruction at Nyack Public Schools, along with some other school staff, and Sonia Murdoch. The plans that we made that day were put on hold, like everything else, in 2020. But, next slide, the bridge is still under construction. It's just held over until a future date. The NIAC Basics Coalition plans to host a showing of The Dark Side of the Full Moon, and also have a Q&A with co-producer Jennifer Silman, as well as Sonia Murdoch. Attendees will be invited to join a full-day workshop with NIAC Basics Coalition members to be held shortly after the film event, and the training will be provided by the Resource Center of New York. The end goal is to offer an opportunity to coalition members, as well as the many vested partners recruited throughout the community since we started in 2017. Facilitators are the human connection within a circle of caring pregnancy, postpartum, depression, anxiety support group that allows for group to be started anywhere. All of the materials and instructions are provided by the Training Institute, and continuing education is available for many professions. Next slide. You know, a good net is made with one line tied with many knots to form a mesh. The tighter the mesh, the better the net. Strengthening disease prevention will tighten your net. But when you also strengthen well-being, the mesh gets smaller and you build a better net that people don't fall through. Over the course of our outreach, it started to become abundantly clear that many, if not all, people of childbearing age are likely to have suffered trauma of some form, and that a blanket referral to a formal provider-patient relationship was not always what people needed in the moment. Perhaps a human connection via a trained facilitator within a circle of caring support group is enough to allow individuals in distress to seek help as part of building resilience, says Diana Yazzie Levine in the book Wellbeing. Support groups can be planted in many diverse settings where people feel known, safe, and understood. I wish I could have told you today that we have many support groups in our community now as a result of this training. Some in corporations, some in school systems, some in police and fire services, some in the highest risk community centers. Wherever people live and work is a perfect setting for moms and dads. But I cannot tell you that yet. Next slide. But I can tell you for certain that we will keep moving forward on parental and infant mental health. I would encourage you to check out the basics and find out how you can bring it to your community. The Basics is a national campaign and they make their tools available to you. They have a strategic plan, resources, and a lot of support. I put the links here for you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so very much to each of our presenters here today for your dedication, for being champions for new families, and really wonderful work with connecting the dots for parental mental health, infant mental health, and overall well-being. So at this time, I know that we've run over a little bit, but we're fortunate that our speakers are able to continue here with us. So we would like, before moving on to questions, we'd like to ask one last question today regarding the material of this webinar series. We want to use this webinar series as a way to bring together professionals in the field of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and grow this statewide network. If there are some topics you'd like to see in the future in this webinar series, please feel free to add them in the chat now or before logging off at the end of our Q&A discussion. So thank you. So at this time, I'd like to invite our attendees here to feel free that you can share your video. And if you'd like to unmute yourself, and you can ask your question that way, or if you'd like to ask questions or make any comments in the chat, and Jabrea will share those. So please feel free to share your comments, any questions at this time. Anybody wants to raise their hand at all? Questions? Okay, well, as we are moving ahead here, I'll ask a question of the panelists, the presenters. So with each of you, what has really struck me, because working with the Better Baby Care campaign now for the past few years, and besides the dedication of all members and the strong community support that you have in Rockland County, but each of you have come from really different backgrounds. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, why is parental mental health important to you, or what helped you make that connection? Because each of you has really, taken on showing how we say everyone does play a role in the safety net for perinatal mood disorders and parents and infants. So who'd like to go, Shelley?
I'll go. I don't know, about 12 years ago when I started to work in the field of infant and maternal wellness, and I started to learn more and more about perinatal mood anxiety disorders. And the reason I was attracted to that field is because I know parenting is really hard and we don't talk about it enough, and we create a beautiful, perfect scenario of what this should be like. And it was kind of setting up parents to fail almost, because you can't live up to that socialized, beautiful vision. So I became very interested in how we support families and infants and parents. And so that was the kernel. And it took me, I think, 25 something years to even get into that area, because I was in all different social work environments. And then I met Sonia on a task force, and I learned more, and I heard amazing stories from women. And I started working with a statewide organization that did mainly education around infant safe sleep and SIDS reduction, risk reduction. And I chose to weave in the idea that we're talking about putting babies to sleep safely, but what if the mom is not doing well? What are we asking of her and other parents and caregivers? What if, it sounds simple, put the baby to sleep on their back and don't listen to everyone else and blah, blah, blah. But what if they're too depressed or too anxious or not supported to do that? And that brought me into, we need to understand perinatal mood anxiety disorders and create resources, is what I was learning from the task force, et cetera, et cetera. And then one of the things I did in the 5 counties I covered was I joined the Better Baby Care campaign. And I heard it elsewhere in the state. The focus was on infant mental health, infant mental health, infant mental health. And it just started to literally make me crazy, because if you don't have caregivers, moms who are well, that's going to create the whole scenario. Why are we not backing it up to promote wellness in parents and families, to allow that environment, that healthy environment for infants? So that became my mission. And my other mission is, we don't do enough to prepare parents to be parents, and in an honest way to basically tell them how bad it could be and how they need to garner all the supports and the health, and that it does take a village. I've always believed it takes a village. So if mom's left alone with an infant all day, every day, with no outlets, I hear it every day in the practice. I hear the pain, emotional pain. Anyway, that's
Thanks, Dr. Fleit, for sharing your journey.
It was a journey.
Yeah, so we greatly appreciate that. I also am reminded when you were sharing too, again, we're all talking about working towards the importance of building community support for new parents, new families. So if there's anyone, again, who hasn't yet introduced themselves, participants, attendees today, again, feel free to put your name and contact information, what organization you're from, so we can all learn about different resources that are out there. So Elaine or Fran, would you like to share of how you came to about with the connection here, parents' mental health, babies' well-being?
Elaine, should I go next?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, so we started the subcommittee. The initial focus was on autism, which is the area where my passions lie. And I had blinders on, and that's all I wanted. I wanted to improve early identification, bringing it down to 1 year, not in terms of diagnosis, but in terms of seeing what the red flags were and providing those children who are at risk, not with a diagnosis, but with the appropriate therapy that they needed. And we have a great early intervention program through the county that could do that, but we weren't identifying the children that young because there was no interest. I shouldn't say no interest. There wasn't an emphasis put on social communication. So as our committee went on and on, I realized, oh my gosh, social communication and social emotional milestones are one in the same, because everything that a parent does with a baby that first year prepares that child and propels that child towards first words and towards language. And all the things that they're doing are what we call pre-linguistic, which is before words. They're showing the children, they're showing the children things. They're looking at the child's looking at them. The child's orienting to name. The child is beginning to point and do joint attention. All those pre-linguistic before first words behaviors were one and the same. So once I made that connection, they had me. And I also believe that if you are going to treat any kind of trauma in a mom or a parent, that at the same time, you really have to treat the baby, because that interaction, even if there's nothing perfect. I go into homes for early intervention. I had gone into homes 3 to 5. You walk into the home, you come in with an agenda, to teach that child language, to coach the parent. But if they're not with you, if they're not in the moment, so we have to be sensitive that it is a multifaceted treatment, not only for the mom, but the mom, the baby and the mom, or the parent or caregiver. And, we just go in homes, expect the parent to do what we're telling them to do, and then we leave. But that's not the case. We have to be able to be supportive, and we've gone down to what's called a coaching level for parents of babies, because we want to show them how to get the joy out of those little interactions that happen on a daily basis. No bells, no whistles, no batteries, no cell phones, just your everyday eating, sleeping, drinking, playing, pooping, whatever it is. You can create a moment that is connective and lets that child know that you are interested in what they're doing. And that lays the foundation for everything that is to come. So can you imagine if we could get in there from birth to 1 year and just coach parents, no matter if they had a problem or not? It would be miraculous, the children that we would turn out. So like I always joke, I wish somebody taught me all this when I had my kids, but I get to work on other people's children now, and it's
Try
my
again.
pleasure. And also, I just wanted, before I end, I put my email in the chat, and also I want you to alert you to an amazing resource. It's called Baby Navigator. If you Google it and you look at it, anyone who works with children, with parents, it is an amazing resource. If you need me to explain it more to you in terms of, it actually does a milestone checkup on your social emotional and emotional development every month from the time whenever you register. And it's fabulous and it's free. Can't get better than that. So anybody who needs to contact me or talk to me, I put my email in there. Okay.
Thanks, Fran, so much for sharing about also your dedication, your passion with this in this field, and making that connection from from where you had been now to such a champion.
They took my blinders off.
So thank you. Grateful that you're here. So Elaine, would you like to share?
Sure. So, I mentioned both personal and professional. And personally, as a mom of 3 daughters who were very quickly approaching the childbearing years, I was quite terrified and felt I really needed to know this. This is something that was going to impact my life, whether, it was going to happen, and I wanted to be prepared. So that was one reason I really wanted to be part of this subcommittee. And the professional reason was because of the fact that I had been counseling women throughout their pregnancies for so many years. And this was a prenatal center, and most of these pregnancies were very high risk women. And what I saw was, in the medical world, we work in silos. And that, women they're taken care of during their pregnancy with the one outcome in mind of giving birth to a healthy baby. And that's it. Once that baby is on board, you're discharged, you're on your own. And I didn't see a whole lot of support given to women during their pregnancy. And when I really started the conversation, like Shelley said, ask the question. When you start asking that question, then you start realizing, wow, now what am I going to do? These people need help. And, we really tried very hard to work on that piece. I mentioned that the lactation consultant got certification, but she was only one person. And when we reached out to providers, many of them, they did not have the sensitivity needed to really help our patients. And many of those patients didn't trust the mental health system. And, like Dr. Horder said, they probably don't need a formal patient-provider relationship. It just became abundantly clear that really there wasn't going to be a huge amount of support out there for women after they give birth. So it just made sense that to really take the next step and really focus on creating support groups. And I really do believe in this because I think that people need to be with people like them who understand them, and they'll open up. And you give them those kinds of resources and they'll feel empowered to get the help they need. But I think that there's definitely more than one way to look at this problem. And I really do believe that when you make those, I had Googled how to make a net. And, it was interesting because he said, a good net has a very tight mesh so that the holes aren't very big. And, it really gave me a great visual because, when you make a really loose net, people are going to fall through it. You're going to lose them. But if you tighten and make, put a lot of knots in that net, which are represented by a lot of different support groups all over your community, then the chances are you're not going to lose people, not like we do now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine, for being a champion and, and also for promoting the Circle of Caring program with the support groups, the importance of that. And I do want to mention, I did put in the chat for the information for the next upcoming Circle of Caring, which is going to be hosted virtually, and it's open to peer supporters, community supporters, as well as professionals. So thank you. Are there any other questions, comments at this time?
I just wanted to say, this is Marcia Shear. I'd like to thank the 3 presenters. They did a wonderful job of letting us know how important it is to understand PMAD, but also how we as a group are much more powerful than any individual can be. And the Better Baby Care campaign was started many years ago, and we've done various projects over the years, but we never really focused on a topic quite like PMAD that would have such important effects and that really would integrate all of the members of the Better Baby Care campaign. The group still continues the Better Baby Care campaign. And what we've done in the subcommittee, going back to them, um, I think has really opened many people's eyes to the issue. So, we'll just continue on. And I believe that the commitment and passion of Elaine, Shelley, and Fran, and of course Sonia, and Sonia and Shelley coming all the way from Long Island was just amazing.
Easy.
I love our road trips.
Thank you all for making it happen.
And Marcia, thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
And-
Marcia,
and-
for being here and commenting. And I wasn't sure if it's, is it Merlene? Do you have a question or a comment, Merlene, please?
Yes, Merlene, I'll echo, this was really great and informative. My question is, we talked about supporting moms, and one of the things that I think that would be great is if we could have a doula services for our moms. And I'm finding that I can't find any in Rockland. So I was hoping maybe you guys can give some guidance as to where we can, locate any, and if we can get some, I know this is kind of hard, but free services or, support to help moms pay for those type of services here in Rockland.
Merlene, I'll be able to follow up with you even after the webinar.
That would be awesome. Thank
But
you.
thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
We can do some research in Rockland County.
Yes.
So we'll get back to you.
Yep. So are there any other questions, comments for today? Well, we so appreciate everyone staying with us. I know that we went over today, but we really appreciate everyone's time and effort here. And we invite you to continue on with our Moving on Maternal Depression webinar series. So big thank you to each of you and to the Schuyler Center. And on behalf of the Postpartum Resource Center of New York, we wish you a great day. And if it's anyone who's watching after this live event, we again, thank you also for joining us. So have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.